Okay, so hi everyone. Sorry about the challenges. Oh, maybe so the thunder and lightning. Good point, Manon. So hi, I'm Kerri. I'm the Coffee and Conversation Counselor. I'm with Coverdale Counselling in Riverview, New Brunswick, and I've been partnering with the Canadian Mental Health Association since 2017, and I love doing these kinds of events, and I'm excited to see you all here. So we've been talking for the last 3 weeks. This is week number 3. We've been talking about building our anxiety toolbox, and we have come to the third and final session. And in this session, we're going to be talking about alternative responses, grounding, and self-care. So just to quickly recap, in last week's session, we were talking about automatic thoughts, unhelpful cognitions, and learning to identify our triggers. So if you recall, we talked about things like mental filter, jumping to conclusions, the mind reading, the future thinking, and so on. So just a reminder of where we were last week. And then we had sent you with some homework to check in with yourself as to what might be your potential stimulus. What were your triggers or activators for your anxiety? So we talked about, some internal activators, our emotions, the feelings of fear, worry, etc. We talked about mental images. We know that the brain thinks in images, that we very rarely think in words. We think in kind of video almost. So replaying those personal interactions, maybe some performance experience, and so on. Those physical state, those other internal pieces like if you're feeling tachycardic, that high heart rate, the lightheadedness, the tightness in the chest, the jaw, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or the thoughts. What are those automatic negative thoughts around, oh, this is going to go badly, this is going to be a horrible experience, that kind of catastrophic thinking. And then we talked about, those external activators, like the presence of other people. What does that look like for you? Attending a social event, meeting with a boss, spending time with your roommates, your family, etc. The physical settings, maybe sitting in a car, out in an open area like a park or a beach, maybe being inside a store or your workplace. The societal or social pressures that may contribute to your external feelings, your external activators. This may be, an experience of feeling like you're pressured to make friends, to engage in social interactions, feeling pressured to perform well, maybe in comparison to peers or to colleagues. And then activities that may be activating for you. Maybe it's, a sporting event or a party, a social engagement. Maybe it's going home to visit family for the weekend, what have you. So these are some of the internal and external triggers or activators. And so I had challenged you and encouraged you over this past week to look at the things that actually stimulate or cause your anxiety to be activated. So this week, we're going to be talking about those alternative responses instead of those automatic negative or unhelpful cognitions, ways to get grounded and how to engage in self-care. And then we're going to be looking at how to put it all together in an action plan. Because ultimately, we need to have a good action plan to get there. Excuse me. So let's start with, what are those alternative responses? Well, we have alternative thoughts and images. We have, I've got that sore throat happening. We have those alternative behaviors, and we have those alternative feelings. So these are kind of those alternative responses, thoughts and images, behaviors, or feelings. So let's explore these a little more closely. So in order to explore these, we really do need to check in with ourselves and understand what we're experiencing. Is it a thought? Is it a feeling? Is it a behavior? Really noticing what's happening in your body, what's happening in your mind, what's happening in your interactions with other people. These are important places in which we can check in. So let's start by checking in with our thoughts. We talked last week about those negative thoughts, those automatic negative thoughts. Well, what are some of our alternative thoughts? Okay, so we want to really explore what are other ways of looking at the situation. Consider, am I looking at the whole picture? Am I seeing this in a broad scale, objectively, kind of like up in a drone, looking at it from a distance? What might be a more helpful way of viewing the situation? Is there a different perspective? What kinds of unhelpful thinking styles am I engaging in and using here, right? And we'll come back to reviewing those cognitive, those unhelpful thinking styles in a moment. Is there evidence that what I'm thinking is true, that my thoughts are true? Is there an alternative way of thinking about the situation that is more true, right? Kind of what's that scale, that continuum of evidence? And then what is the probability that my thoughts will actually happen, right? Is there some suggestion that it's highly probable, or is it more improbable? What are some other things that could happen, right? That are equally, if not more, probable? And have I had any experiences in the past that suggest that this thought that I'm having may not be completely true all the time? Remember, we talked about not engaging in those absolutes. And asking ourselves, can I really predict the future here? Is it helpful to even try that? What is more helpful than trying to predict the future? We might check in with ourselves by asking, am I exaggerating how bad the result may be? What is more realistic? So it's always that kind of like, well, what if it's not that, but it's this? Can I actually read people's minds? What else might they be thinking? Right? So that notion of if someone ignores you in the street and the unhelpful cognition is, oh, they don't like me. If we check in with ourselves, we might say, oh, the sun was in their eyes. They probably didn't see me. So checking in. If a friend or a loved one were in this situation, what would I tell them? If they had this negative thought, what would I encourage them to think about alternatively? So really, it's a way to get into challenging and giving the flip side to those negative cognitions, to those negative thoughts. So looking at some alternative thoughts. And I really love the notion of, am I looking at the whole picture, the whole situation, or am I hyper-focused on one tiny little bit that is only giving me just the most microscopic bit of information? So just to review very quickly, some of the cognitive distortions that we have, those common thinking styles. So if you recall, we talked about all or nothing thinking, overgeneralizing, disqualifying the positive, magnification and minimization, so catastrophic thoughts, shoulding and musting, personalization, emotional reasoning, labeling, jumping to conclusions, which includes fortune telling and mind reading, and then our mental filters. So those are those unhelpful thinking styles. And so it's really important as we're looking at alternative thought patterns, alternative thinking, to look at what the flip side of each of those might be. And as you, sorry, I have been losing my voice all week. I had it completely lost on Wednesday. I thought it was back. I may be gone again. So pardon me. So we've talked now about alternative thoughts. Let's talk then about alternative behaviors. Again, checking in with ourselves. Ask. It's always about the ask. So this is approaching the anxiety with some curiosity, that non-judgmental place, just curiosity. What could I do in the moment that would be more helpful? What could I do? So there's the behavior. What's the best thing to do for me, for others, or for the situation? And if this feared situation, the thing that I've thought about actually happens, how will I cope? What will I do? What coping skills can I use to handle the situation? And what have I done in the past in these kinds of situations that has actually proved to be helpful, not harmful? If my feared situation does in fact happen, okay, so that's that if. Other behaviors, is there something that I'm needing to work on with regard to letting go of being okay with, of accepting? Is it okay to consider that I need to accept being okay with not being perfect? Do I need to work on having faith in the future, in others, and in myself? These are alternative behaviors. A coping skill might be to breathe, really focus our attention on our breathing and practice that balloon breathing. This is one that a lot of people who work with children in schools will use. It's the balloon, the belly breathing balloon. And this is, imagine that there is a deflated balloon in your belly. And as you inhale, you're inflating that belly. So kind of diaphragm area, diaphragmatic breathing. Inhaling, imagining you're filling the balloon. So going from the tiny balloon to expansion. And then on the exhale, imagining the balloon deflating. So we're having a strong visual of inflation and deflation. And this is an alternative behavior in which we can engage when we're feeling anxious. For those of you who like apps, the Calm app, for example, has a breathing component where they show a circle that does this expansion and contraction on each inhale and exhale. And it's a very great visual reminder of our breathing. So these are some alternative behaviors. Now let's talk about alternative feelings. So we've hit thoughts, then behaviors, and now feelings. Again, checking in with ourselves, questioning, approaching this with curiosity. What might it feel like? What might it feel like if I acted or thought differently? So we're referring back to the previous two by asking now, I'm thinking differently, I'm behaving differently, so how will that feel different? And when I'm not feeling this way, do I think about this situation differently? So if I'm not feeling scared, would I think about this situation differently? Checking in with yourself and saying, are there any strengths? Are there any positives in me or in the situation that I may be ignoring because I have the anxiety blinders on? What else might this anxiety be related to, right? Is it really about feeling angry? Perhaps it's more about feeling scared or embarrassed or hungry, right? And then tell yourself, check in and say, you know what, this feeling will pass. This is a normal, whatever the heck normal means, natural body reaction. Oh, wow, what's it like when we change our thoughts and our behavior? How does that impact the way we feel? Quite extraordinary how they're all intermingled, intertwined. So then what are our coping strategies, right? We really need to think about coping strategies for each of these things. We may consider engaging in some deep breathing, which we talked about with the expansion and contraction, or the 4-7-8 breathing. And really, if we really want to stimulate and activate the parasympathetic system, we want to practice breathing for about 7 minutes per day. We might distract ourselves, and we'll talk more about what that might look like. We might seek support from a friend or a family member, someone we trust. We might engage in a pleasurable activity. For me, I love baking, for example. I love to bake bread. It's a pleasurable activity for me. And we might use an anxiety first aid kit. And I'm going to talk about that now because I think it's something that we don't actually think about. So an anxiety first aid kit. This is something I do with many of the youth that I work with, but also some adults. So it's a great idea to grab a box or a bag, something that is portable. So an old glasses case works quite well. In that box, and you can decorate it up, you can do whatever you want, place some items that are comforting to you, that will help you remember your strategies for calming your anxiety. So for example, when I work with children, sometimes they might put a small little container of slime or a picture of their family. Older teens and young adults that I work with will write down like a playlist or the contact information for someone they want to talk to. There might be a piece, like a rock, like a grounding rock, could be a piece of gum or a candy. Anything that is portable that will help you remember that you are in control of how you feel and that you can manage and mitigate your anxiety. So it's a little first aid kit for your anxiety. And it's a fun activity to do if you're thinking about doing this with your children or with your teenagers. It's a great, get some magazines, cut them up, kind of decoupage or Mod Podge the whole box. If it's something that you want to keep at home, a shoebox is a great size for creating an anxiety toolkit, an anxiety emergency kit rather. And then you can put larger items, comfort items in that. Maybe it's an essential oil that you really like, or a soft blanket, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Creating that portable or semi-portable container that helps you cope in that moment. And it's a really great strategy that a lot of folks really, really appreciate. Sorry, I am really struggling with my allergies today. So let's talk about some pleasant activities or pleasurable activities. Sometimes we forget in the moments of our highest anxiety what we like. We forget what things give us pleasure. So we have a brief, I'm joking, it's not very brief, list of some items. So look at this. There's so many different things, you know, discussing your favorite hobby, going bird watching, caring for plants, getting a massage, giving a gift, being at the beach, going to a lunch, fishing, fixing something, gardening, doing yard work, being with someone you love, going out into the country, being at a family get-together, going to a concert, a play, going for a hike, having a coffee with a trusted friend, going to a sporting event, engaging in your spiritual practice, budgeting your time, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So there are lots of different pleasurable or pleasant activities. And since we are all individuals and since we are all unique, they will show up differently for each of us. So these are just some suggestions of things that may be pleasant activities that you can engage in to shift your mind, your behavior, your feelings out of that anxious state. One of the things that I really love is to go for a long walk or a long run. That feels great for me. So finding the thing that works for you will be very important. So back into those alternative behaviors. Oops, pardon me, I went backwards. One of those alternative behaviors is grounding. Okay, grounding. When we become overwhelmed, with distressing thoughts, with uncomfortable feelings, when we become flooded with intense anxiety, any activity, any behavior or action that helps keep our mind and our body connected in the same place and time is called grounding. As we recall, when we're feeling anxious, our mind tends to forward think with worry or backward think with rumination. And we want to keep our mind and body in the same timeline. Grounding is really helpful in regaining a sense of stability, mental focus, and attention. So we're going to talk about a few potential grounding activities that we can engage in or add to our toolkit to help us when we're feeling dysregulated. And you may need to find, 2 or 3 or 10 of these to find the ones that fit for you. You don't find the perfect pair of running shoes the first time you go out, or that perfect little black dress isn't the first one you try on. So you may need to try multiple ones to help you. And when you find the grounding activity that really speaks to you, you will find that it helps you to be firmly anchored in the present moment. And it will provide you with the space, emotional space, that you need in order to focus your energy more appropriately. So let's talk about some potential grounding activities. Simple. Remind yourself of who you are now. So any of you who are in first responding capacities, if you've done any first aid, one of the things that we often ask people who have had an accident or a traumatic experience is, do you know who you are? Do you know your name? Do you know where you are? Do you know what year it is? This is because we want to know that they're conscious and coherent. But in a mental health capacity, it helps us remember that we're not stuck in future worrying or past ruminating. Remind yourself of who you are now. So out loud, say your name. My name is Kerri Gaskin. I'm X number of years. I'm not going to divulge. And I am in Riverview, right? So thinking about that. Breathe. Take 10 slow, deep breaths. Fill that balloon 10 times. Focus your attention on the breath, on each inhale and each exhale. And as a way of counting, you can say the number on the exhale. So you would inhale 1, right? So just practicing that. Splash water on your face, cool water, or place a cool wet cloth on your face or on your wrists or on the back of your neck, right? The vagus nerve, again, runs through those areas, and cold water or cool water can help activate the vagus nerve. pay really purposeful attention as you hold a cold, and I'm going to encourage non-alcoholic beverage in your hands. And the reason I say non-alcoholic is that alcohol can indeed amplify our feelings of anxiety. So hold a cold beverage, an ice cold soda, juice, glass of water, what have you, and feel it. Notice the coldness, notice the condensation, the wetness outside of the beverage. Note the taste as you drink it. If it's, a soda or a sparkling water, notice the carbonation and how that feels in your mouth. Do all of these things. Alternatively, you can do this with a hot beverage, coffee, tea, cocoa, what have you, and feel it. Notice the steam. Breathe in the steam, smell it, notice the taste, the experience of holding something warm. Again, the physical sensation brings us back and connects us to the moment. So grounding techniques very often include multiple senses. So find a grounding object. So when I was talking about the anxiety first aid kit, we were talking about, find a rock or a piece of fabric, something that you can hold on to, look at, listen to, or smell. So that's where the essential oil comes into place, or a family photograph, etc. Something that makes you feel centered. This could be a pillow, smooth stone, any object that represents a sense of safety or comfort. Listen to music. This is something I encourage with a lot of my teen clients, is to create that playlist. Pay close attention and listen for something new or different, or listen to something that is familiar and comforting. While you're sitting, and I'm going to encourage those of you who are sitting right now, notice how the chair feels. Feel the chair under you. Feel the weight of your body on the chair. Feel your legs, the backs of your legs pressing down on the seat. Feel the lower back in the lumbar section of the chair. Notice that. If you're laying down, same thing. Notice the contact between your body and the surface, the couch, the floor, the bed, what have you. Start at your head and work your way all the way down to your feet. Notice how each part of your body feels in contact with the surface on which you're lying. Now stop, look, and listen. So stop what you're doing. Look around. Notice what you can see and hear nearby or in the distance. Engage in those senses. Look around and notice what's in front of you and to each side. Name the things that you see. Again, this brings us back to the present moment. I see my desktop computer. I see my tablet. I see my phone. I see my coffee cup. Notice things. Get moving. Get up and walk around. Take time to notice each step. Feel how the ground feels under your foot. And if you can, get outside. Take a step outside and notice the temperature. I went outside about an hour ago and it hit me, the humidity. Notice the temperature. Notice the sounds, the traffic going by, or the birds in the trees, the ground under your feet, the smell in the air. Obviously with these allergies, I'm not smelling anything right now. One exercise that is often used in therapeutic settings for grounding is 5-4-3-2-1. And those of you who have done counseling in the past may be familiar with this one. When you feel activated, and this is a great one for kids, they love this, use your 5 senses. Start with see. Name 5 things you can see in the room with you. So 5. Touch and feel. Name 4 things you can feel. Chair at my back, my feet on the floor, a desk under my hands. 3 things you can hear. I can hear the HVAC system. I can hear cars going by. I can hear my hand tapping on the desk. Smell. Okay, that one's shot for me with allergies, but maybe I could smell coffee, or I could smell the recirculated air in the office. Taste. Name a strong taste or flavor that you can remember, or something that you've just had. So I just had a coffee, so I can taste coffee. Right? So being engaged with all of your senses in that moment. And this is a very popular grounding activity that is shared widely. You may also want to just write down or say out loud some grounding statements, like this situation won't last forever. I can ride this out, not let it get me down. These are feelings and eventually they'll go away. And just be aware that these are grounding statements, and write your own, of course. There are lots of different things that you can say that will help you. So that's grounding. These are just basics of how we can get grounded when we're feeling activated. But what about self-care? So most of us have heard the term self-care before. And yes, it can come up as, excuse me, I'm just gonna try to keep the throat from going completely. Sometimes people talk about self-care as being a self-indulgent behavior, as a selfish behavior, as a luxury behavior. And people talk about it, about self-care in many different ways. They kind of talk about it in the concept of, you know, taking some me time, maybe hanging out with friends, getting outside for a bit. But when dealing with anxiety, it's really important to unpack the idea of self-care a little more closely, a little more effectively, with a bit more care. So self-care ultimately underlies our healthy living in general. It's particularly relevant for our mental health, right? And I know that the expectation is a bit trite when we say this, but when we are flying and they say if the cabin depressurizes and the oxygen mask drops, put the mask over your own nose and mouth before assisting someone else. And the reason, of course, as we know, is because if we can't breathe, we're no good to anyone. And so I know it can be very difficult when we're helpers, when we want to help other people, whether you're a parent, a caregiver, whether you're in a helping profession, or just a generally good human. We want to help other people. And so we tend to put our own needs second or even further back down the line. But in fact, if we take care of our own needs, we're in a much better position to help others. So self-care can ultimately be divided into the 5 domains that you see on your screen right now: the social, the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. We can think of these as buckets, right? And we've heard of, you know, fill your bucket. We are absolutely at our best when our buckets are full, or at least nearly full. But it takes a lot of work to keep them that way, right? It's not like we have a tap constantly flowing. We actually need to make an effort to fill that, to fill that bucket. When we're feeling low, or when our anxiety is particularly high, it may be, in some cases, because our buckets have gotten low. And in some cases, they even have become empty. And that would be leading us into kind of that burnout place. It is important to look at filling all 5 buckets, right? It's typical to lose sight of one bucket or the other every once in a while. And the ones that we tend to lose sight of are the ones we probably need to tend to and fill the most. What's important to remember is that because self-care is unique to the individual, because it is unique to every person, there will be different ways to fill the buckets. And because there are so many different ways to fill each bucket, something that works for me may not work for you. And something that works for you may not work for the next person, and so on. The most important thing to remember is it doesn't matter whether you're pouring hot water or cold water, it's that you're filling the bucket, right? It's important that what you're doing is supporting your needs and in these 5 domains. I think it's kind of cool because SPEM is the acronym, and SPEM is the Latin word for hope. I just, you know, little side piece. And self-care to me is an indicator of hope, giving you a better future. You know, little sidebar there. Little geeky moment. So let's start with the social domain and what that looks like. So the social bucket really has to do with the people around us, the connections that we have with them. And people can refer to pretty much anybody, right? Anybody that we have a relationship with. This could be friends, family, coworkers, classmates, you know, the person at the grocery store that you see every single Saturday when you pick up your groceries. In some cases, our social connections to others are not strong enough. They're just weak, and we choose to put more effort into planning time to spend with those people. On the other hand, there may be some folks that we spend way too much time with, and those social connections can be really overloaded. It can be just too much, in which case taking time for ourselves may actually help to fill our bucket. So ways that we can consider filling the social bucket would be to ask, again, we're approaching things with an air of curiosity, with a learner's mind, is to ask ourselves, how can I connect with other people? That might be going to a party, texting with a friend, doing a Zoom call with a friend, reconnecting with an old high school friend, going for a coffee with your buddy, reaching out for support when something is really bothering you. These would be ways that we can connect with other people. Equally important is remembering to ask yourself, how can I disconnect when social interactions are just getting to be way too much for me? So this might be turning off your phone for an hour, disconnecting from social media, going for a walk by yourself, or going for a coffee by yourself, right? These are ways that we might find to disconnect in order to recharge. Let's have a look at the physical bucket. So this is really looking at the whole body. This is ensuring that healthy care habits are taken care of. This is, physical activity, nutrition, rest, and hydration, right? These are ultimately the physical elements. And again, they will vary from individual to individual. Somebody might say, well, I'm going to go out for a 20K run, and somebody else might say, well, I'm going out for a 10-minute walk. Neither is right, neither is wrong if it suits the individual, okay? So really being aware that regular physical activity is important as part of our self-care, at least a moderate level of activity in order to raise our heart rate several times a week. Nutrition, eating snacks and meals that support a wide variety of dietary and nutritional needs. So we're getting a wide range of nutrients in our diet. And I'm not a dietitian by any stretch of the imagination, just being aware that this is part of good self-care. And if that's something that you struggle with, speaking with a holistic nutritionist, a registered dietitian, a naturopath, and so on would be a great strategy. And then really getting mindful and intentional about your sleep and your sleep hygiene. This is important. And the amount of sleep that our body needs tends to decrease as we get older. As young children, we're looking at, say, 12 hours of sleep per night for appropriateness. And then, university age, maybe it's, 8 to 10 hours. Older adults might be about 5 hours. So, it changes throughout our lives and through our life cycle. So being aware of that and your unique needs is really important. And being aware of what your sleep needs in terms of times of day is very important. The biggest piece is to remember that it's consistent, right? That we're being really consistent and that we have good sleep hygiene. And of course, hydration. I'm a poor example today with coffee. I normally have both coffee and water. Forgot to pour water before we started. So again, asking yourselves questions. How can I get physically active? How can I relax? Because there's always that balance. And how can I nourish my body? Nourishing it with food, with sleep, etc. Take that bath. Do a meditation. Lay on the beach. Go to bed early. These would be examples of physical relaxation. Going to the gym, going for a walk, playing around with golf. These would be examples of physical activation. So emotional is next, and I know we're running short on time, so we're going to fly through this. Emotional. The emotional bucket is frequently forgotten. This really important space, I guess, is to ensure that you're giving yourself permission to feel a range of both positive and negative emotions. And I think that it's really important that we remember that it's about giving ourselves permission, right? Being okay with and accepting. As with many aspects of emotional regulation and anxiety, balance is key. So when we engage in really good emotional self-care, we are ensuring that we're not trying to bottle up or stuff down everything negative in our lives, but we're giving ourselves permission to experience some of those more distressing feelings in a healthy way. So how do we fill this particular bucket? Ask ourselves some more questions. Again, curiosity. How can I ensure that I laugh? I took some time yesterday in the midst of something, and I watched, a show on Netflix for half an hour just because I needed that laugh, right? So watch a funny video, tell a joke, reminisce about an old time, like a happy time. And then ask yourself things like, how can I let myself feel worry in a healthy way? So planning worry time, those worry appointments, watching a sad movie, that gives us that catharsis when we cry about something that is fictional. Take time to remember people who are no longer with us, experiencing healthy grief, perhaps in journaling, writing down how we feel and what our experience is. These are examples of how we can really engage in emotional self-care. But what about mental self-care? And sometimes we think that they're the same, but they are different. Mental self-care is really about engaging the brain, both in activating it and relaxing it. So let me just make a caveat. Mental self-care does not include bringing home your work or engaging in academic work if you're a student. These are not self-care because they're prescribed by somebody else. You're fulfilling somebody else's requirements, requests. This is not your self-care. This is an external pressure. So work, schoolwork, not part of mental self-care. You need obviously time in your schedule to focus on these things, but they are not part of the self-care piece. Unless lifelong learning in academia is really what excites you. So then in that case, try to find ways to learn about something that is outside of your scope of practice, outside of your academic requirements or outside of your working requirements, even if it's just for 5 minutes a day, something that interests you. So ways that we can fill this bucket: puzzles, games, crosswords, Sudokus, languages, having debates, healthy, safe debates, great conversation, learning a new skill. And those are ways to activate the brain, and to relax the brain. Watch a show that is non-stimulating. Do a meditation. Let your mind just kind of wander. Try to do absolutely nothing for like 5 minutes, set a timer, see how that goes. These are ways that we can relax the brain. My mouse is doing something funky here, just a second. Here we go. So what's next? Well, spiritual self-care. And this is something that I think a lot of people get tangled up in. This is not necessarily about a religious practice. The spiritual bucket is really about recognizing things outside of ourselves and outside of our day-to-day life. And this is sometimes the really difficult bucket to define, that really difficult domain to define, because it means so many different things to so many different people. And it's important for us to note that it can, but does not necessarily mean a religious or faith practice. So for example, for many people, spiritual self-care could be getting outside and taking time to notice things in nature. I used to love when I was skiing and I'd be at the top of the mountain and there's that moment of just feeling so connected. Taking the time to notice things in nature that we don't always recognize, we don't always notice. Other people might do the exact same activity, say, let's take skiing for an example, and may take that time to reflect on their religious or faith views. Or maybe they take that time to reflect on themselves as individuals. Different than being socially alone, this really recognizes and emphasizes that we are important and that we deserve to do things that we want to just because every once in a while. So again, asking ourselves those questions: how can I recognize things outside myself? How can I give myself me time and recognize that what I want matters? So this would be spending time in nature, going to a religious service, reading spiritual texts, volunteering to help others. Me time might be like eating that pint of Haagen-Dazs dark chocolate ice cream, watching television, saying no, setting boundaries and saying no to other people, making time for solitude and quiet reflection, and just really asking yourself, how do I fill my own personal spiritual bucket? So those are the 5 domains of self-care. So we've talked about those alternative thoughts, the grounding, and the self-care. But now, how do we put it all together? What do we do to put it all together? That's a great question, right? It's one thing to kind of academically know that these are things that are helpful, but what's the plan? Well, first of all, and I hope you have pen and paper, this is going to be an important kind of listing, and of course you can always go back and review the replay later. Identify your primary anxiety symptoms. So each of us will have specific symptoms that are unique to us that hit us in these 4 areas. What are your emotional anxiety symptoms? Like, what do you feel? What are your physical anxiety symptoms? What happens in your body? What are your cognitive anxiety symptoms? What do you think? And then what are your behavioral anxiety symptoms? What do you do, or how do you react? And we need to take note of these things because we can't make a coherent plan for managing our anxiety without knowing how it shows up. We need to know what it looks like in us. For me, I'm short-tempered when I have high anxiety. That's a behavior. I get snappy, irritable. I feel overwhelmed. I experience physically a clenching in my jaw and a racing in my heart. And my thoughts are, I can't cope with this. This is too much. So those would be symptoms of anxiety for me. They'll be unique to every individual. After you've figured out what your symptoms are, dive into the homework from last week and recognize your triggers. What are the things that activate your anxiety? What are your unhelpful ways of thinking? Is it the all or nothing, the black and white? Is it the catastrophizing? Is it the future thinking or mind reading? What is it that you do? And then what are your situational triggers? Is it unfamiliar situations? Is it those negative thoughts? Is it large crowds? Is it speaking in public? Being aware of what your triggers are. And we really need to be aware of that. Not that so we can avoid it necessarily, but so that we can be aware and be prepared for that. Once we've identified what our specific symptoms are and what our specific activators or triggers are, then we can think about the grounding techniques that you have already tried on, because you've now had a whole list of them and you've been trying them on to figure out what works. Now you can make a list of the most helpful grounding techniques for you. So what are the things that you do that are grounding that are most helpful? Then, what are the most helpful relaxation exercises? Maybe it's doing a progressive relaxation or a breathing exercise. Identifying the best time and place for you as an individual to engage in those exercises. You know, for me, I like to do my relaxation outside as much as possible, right? That works for me. And then identifying when I feel overwhelmed, it is helpful for me to ... What is the thing that helps you when you feel overwhelmed? And then identify some positive changes that you can do to help your sleep. And I put that in there because sleep is so foundational. If our sleep is disrupted, if it's inconsistent, then our anxiety is going to be amplified. Sleep is really foundational to good mental health. So looking at these things, and again, I didn't fill any of those in because it is unique to each individual. Every one of us will have a different set of experience. There may be some crossover, sure, there's some shared experience, some commonality, but the specific combination of things will be unique to you. Then I want you to name some goals. Okay? 2 goals you would like to achieve over the next few months related specifically to anxiety and self-care. And these should be specific, achievable, realistic, measurable, and timely, of course. They're SMART goals. So 2 goals you would like to achieve related to anxiety. For example, think about the strategies you would find most helpful and determine which ones you would like to try, how often you would like to try them, when you would like to try them, etc. So 2 goals related to anxiety, and then 2 goals related to self-care. Excuse me. So this could be, what will your self-care look like for the next 2 months? And these goals could be related to your nutrition, to your exercise, to your sleep, to any of those 5 domains of social, physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual. 2. Okay, so we're not making these massive big plans. 2 goals related to anxiety and 2 goals related to self-care. We want to keep it simple so that we don't become overwhelmed and then increase our anxiety. That would defeat the whole purpose of these last 3 sessions. Goals without accountability, however, sometimes don't fall into place. So what is your accountability? How are you going to remind yourselves about your specific plans or goals. What can you do to create accountability? And I don't mean accountability in terms of like external pressures, although certainly there are people who benefit from like challenge groups and so on. But what can you do? Is it putting a Post-it note? Is it putting it in your digital calendar? Is it putting it on your physical calendar? Is it telling a friend about it? Is it sharing it with your therapist? Determine how you will find accountability about your plan and about your goals. There's our plan. So I see that it looks like there's some questions. So I'm going to just slide this on over and see if I can't see the chat box here. The serenity prayer. Even though you're not religious, it does make sense, right? The serenity to accept the things I cannot change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference, and so on. Great point, Angela. I like that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here in a moment, but I'm curious, we have a few minutes if there's any questions around today's session. I would love to hear the questions that you may have around self-care, alternate thoughts, or grounding techniques. So just fire them up in the chat box if you have any questions. Okay, and if there, oh, I love that I can use all of this with your kids too, and need for self-care. Yeah, and I think that's really important to note, Angela, is that any of these techniques, virtually all of the strategies, can be used for any age group, right? And they're all kind of adaptable. So yes, I love that you're going to use it with your kids too. Lynn asks, daily headaches with anxiety. Yeah, that is really common, Lynn, to have headaches related to anxiety. Always want to check with your medical doctor, with your primary care physician or your nurse practitioner to rule out anything physiological, anything biological. But yes, headaches are fairly common with anxiety. One of the great strategies for coping with that would be the stimulation of the parasympathetic system by activating the vagus nerve. So that would be the 7 to 10 minutes of breathing practice per day. Bearing in mind that sometimes if you're not used to doing that, you may get lightheaded. So if you do, stop. But a really great one to help with that daily headache related to anxiety, two different things. The breathing would be inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8, and do that 5 or 6 times. The other thing that's really great to help with anxiety would be a progressive relaxation. Really great one that I really like is on wisemindbody.com. They have a really fantastic progressive relaxation, and because we carry so much tension here, it's pretty natural that we get headaches with anxiety, so you might want to look at a progressive relaxation, Lynn. Other questions? And if there's no further questions, I will thank you all for showing up. Thank you for being here for the last 3 weeks, and really appreciate your participation, the questions you've asked, and by all means, feel free to reach out to me on any of the socials if you have questions, via Facebook, Instagram, etc. And be sure to keep checking in with CMHA. They have some really fantastic resources on their YouTube channel. So be aware that there's so much stuff coming. Difference between physical and behavioral. Yes, absolutely, Lori. Behavioral would be how you act. Shouting, slamming doors, shutting down. Physical would be jaw tension, headaches, racing heart, etc. So there is a difference between the behavioral and the physical for sure. Yes, it has been a fast 3 weeks, Angela. I know, just boom like that, amazing. We've gone from, I think there was snow the first week to, plus 35 and thunderstorms. Again, thank you all for showing up. Please do check out the CMHA of New Brunswick YouTube channel. They have some really great webinars. Everything that has been recorded for the past, 8-9 weeks is available. There's some really fantastic resourcing from multiple professionals. And I will encourage you all to be well and be kind, and most importantly, Be gentle with yourselves. Thank you all so much.